see who just got on. Claude. Oh, John did join. Okay, cool. All right, so this is the dog CEO fetch lab. Here I have it opened up with all the starter code they give you. So it looks like we have an HTML, index.html file here. Not very big, right? I can see offhand it has a div here. You have this label, and then you have this select collection, or not a collection select, but a select tag with options, and then this empty UL. And then in the index.js file, they just have this console log hi, which I assume is so we can see that upon opening this lab, it is connected to the index.html file. So let's go to the top here and says this repository includes this index.html and the JS file. And they give these challenges, challenge 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we'll try and work through them all today. The first is, if I open this up, so open index.html, I can see what the page looks like. And if I open my DevTools, I can see this. Oh, actually, the HR was confusing me, but it looks like the HR is just like a line. It's a HTML tag that it gives you this line across. And I have this select with these options as well. And if I go into my console, I see I have console log hi. So I do know that indeed this is hooked up. We have chat. Horizontal line. Oh, thanks, Steven. I didn't know that. Yeah, HR. I wonder what the R must just be like for horizontal, HOR, whatever. Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of odd to do like styling with HTML tags. It feels very like mid to early 90s, which is my childhood, but yeah. Cool. So I do know this JavaScript file is hooked up, so we can start working towards some of these deliverables. And the first thing says this repository includes, well, we read that, but they give us this endpoint here, image URL, and it says HTTPS here to image/random/4, and it tells us it wants us to add JavaScript so that on page load we do a fetch and fetch the images in the URL above, and then we parse the response and add the elements to the DOM for each image in the array. Cool. Well, with this type of stuff, especially with fetches, how I always like to start out is just console.logging the fetch response to the browser, right, to see that I have the data. Because while fetch requests seem a little foreign to you now, everything you've learned about them so far is kind of as far as they go at this point, especially with fetch get requests. And it's basically boilerplate. So we can write that out here, and it's just going to be a fetch, which with the URL. So the URL would be here, and then you hop into a .then, and you'll see .thens. You can see them chained on the same line, but it's also pretty common to stage your .thens on each individual line, and this white space here does not matter. So the first .then is you have your response, and I'm using arrow functions here, but you want to parse your response.
I'm not gonna lie, I really am.
Hey Sam, do we have a question?
Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Right, and so I can use this .json method to parse the response, and then with that response, what is this data? Well, I'm reaching out to get data that is in the form of dog images, right? And so I can name this variable, I'll just call it dog image data. And then I had said I want to console.log that dog image data. And the final thing here that often can be forgotten, but there's this .catch method we can call. And then if we call this an error, if we have any errors, we can console.log the error. And what that basically means is if these two .thens aren't hit or aren't met, this .catch will console.log the issue that we had with our fetch request. So if I try to fetch right now, so right now I have this empty fetch, right? And if I try to fetch right now, URL isn't a valid endpoint. So if I refresh this, I see that I have this nice error here, failed to fetch at index JS2. And that's coming on line 5, and line 5 is that dot catch. So it's console login this here. Cool. Well, we do have the actual endpoint, so let me click back over to that. Any questions on the construction of this fetch here? Is there anything you want me to go into in more detail? I did kind of go quickly, but you guys have seen these a bit now. Yeah, for sure. And I'm using ES6 arrow functions. This is I feel it's a lot easier than writing the anonymous ES5 functions. It's just cleaner, right? And it's something that you kind of have to memorize. Like with your fetch, especially a GET request, is you do your fetch, you have a dot then when you parse the response using this JSON method. And then from there, we can start with console login, and then you can just add on the dot catch as well. Cool. So now if I refresh the page, we should be console logging the response here, the parsed response. Cool, and we do, right? We have this object, and this object has a message key that it has an array of all the images of the dogs, right? These 4 things, and that's kind of the meat of what I care about, right? So here, if I put a debugger in, so well let's not move forward with that yet, but I do have this message here, right? And so I could even like say, okay, well, what's the dot message on here? And I just get that array by itself, which is neat. All right, so we've kind of made it to that step, right? We know at least now we can reach out and fetch this data, and I actually probably want to wrap this all up in a function, and I'll just call this fetch dog images. So that's kind of what we're doing, right? Nice and descriptive. And I can just cut this and paste it in here. And now, because I have it in a function, if I want this to actually run, I'll have to invoke it. And I always, like I said, I like to kind of separate this here and just put a comment, invoked functions. And I always, for me, I always have them at the bottom, so then I know where to look whenever I open my files. And I'll just invoke this function. So invoke it. So on page load, this function's invoked, and we should then console.log these images. And it works the same way. Cool. All right. Well, instead of console.logging, let's write a function that what does it want us to do, right? We've successfully reached out to the API, got our information. So we've actually completed these 3 things here. So we're now down to this add image elements to the DOM for each thing. Okay, well let's focus on that. I'll create a function called let's just call it add dog images. I'll just call it add dog images. That's pretty descriptive. And now, when I don't know where to start, sometimes I get ahead of myself. What I typically always will do is just put a debugger in first thing. Put a debugger in, and I know I want to pass this information, right? Because I'm actually not going to have a console log here. I'm going to invoke this function. So I'll go ahead and move that. So I'm invoking this function. I'm passing an argument, so I'm going to define a parameter here, and I might as well call this the same thing. I say this is dog image data. You know what? I'm just looking at some inconsistencies here. I just am using the img tag. I'm probably going to make the img tag here, just to be a little anal about stuff. But so I keep things the same. And this isn't really dog image data. This is dog's image data, right? Multiple. Not that that specifically matters, but I like to keep the naming in line, and because I'll show you probably the next function forward. All right, and so I define it with a parameter as well. So when I hit my debugger here, I should have access to whatever I pass in for my parameter dog's image data, which here is that parsed response, right? So let's refresh, and if I have my dev tools open, if I don't have my dev tools open, I won't hit my debugger, right? I'm refreshing, and nothing's happening, so you have to have your dev tools open for the debugger. I refresh, now I hit my debugger. I'm right here in this function. Any questions to how we got here so far?
Hey Nick, real quick, can you real quick go over from the beginning, like a really quick overview, because I just got here a little bit late. Sorry about that.
Sure. The main problem to start off was we had this endpoint they give us, and they want us to do a fetch request to this endpoint, and they want us to then, with that response that we receive and parse, it will be an array of strings that are URLs, and then they want us to add an image for each one. So we're kind of breaking that down. The first thing that we just did out of that, though, is can we do our fetch request, right? And so the standard fetch is fetch as a method that we invoke and pass it in the endpoint, right? So we got that from what they gave us here. That's the endpoint, the image URL. And then you have these .vins you tag on, right? Because this will return a promise, and this is all constant. You'll use this format moving forward, especially with GET requests. So the first .vin is what's returned from this method as a promise, and this is unparsed JSON. It's JSON, right? It's essentially this big, huge string. And if we want to turn it into a JavaScript object, we have to call the .json method on it. So we have this anonymous function here using arrow functions that we define. This is the variable we define, right? We call this thing resp, the thing that's returned, and then we're calling this .json, which will parse that JSON into a JavaScript object. It will parse that string into a JavaScript object. This itself returns a promise that gets passed on to this line, and that parsed data we decided to call dogs image data. That's the variable name we gave it, which is, it's a JavaScript object that has a key value pair that the value of one of those keys message is an array of our dog image data, and all we're doing is we define this add dog images function below that just has a debugger, and we're passing that object into here. And so here we hit our debugger. This last piece .catch is something we're adding on. Not that this will run the same without it, but this .catch is a debugging tool. It's both a tool and it's kind of a necessity moving forward, where if there's any issues that arise during these processes, it will catch those issues, and it will we're passing this anonymous function. We're calling those issues ERR, and we're console out logging those errors. So any issues that arise, it will print those to the console for us, so it's easier for us to debug. And you can do that all with this .catch, and it's always like the last thing you have here. So you can think of it too as like, and you might be confused, like, why this white space? We could chain it all together like this. It just becomes very long, and the typical convention is to indent and chain together all in the same line, so it looks very clean like this. And this catch is kind of like it's catching stuff from above that may fail. Is that good, Sam?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So now so this whole thing gets kicked off when we invoke our fetch dog image function, right? Which will run this fetch, which this fetch in turn invokes this add dog images function and passes it the parsed data. And now we have this debugger that we hit when we refresh. So all this method does here, add dog images, right now is hit a debugger. So we should have access to see what this dog's image data looks like. So if I go back here and I refresh, I hit the debugger and I can look at our dog's image data, and it's that same thing here, right? It's this object, and this object has a key called message, and its value is the array of all these URL strings of the images. Okay, cool. So I can do something here with that, right? Well, let's look in our console. What do I want to do? Well, if I have dog image data, if I call .message on there, then I have that array. This is kind of like the dogs. This is like a dog's image array, right? So I think for my sense, so I can understand what's happening, I'm going to set it to a variable and call it dogs imgarr and set that equal to dogs image data dot message, because this is less readable to me than this name. And now I have this nice handy thing I'm calling array that is just easier for me to follow. So I have that. Well, what can we do with arrays, right? I want, for each of these things here, I want to create an image HTML tag and assign this as the source. See that we have a chat comment. Yeah, we typically iterate through arrays. Good job with that, Stephen. And so now that we have this array, it's a much more friendly piece of data that we're used to working with, right? Dogs image array, and we can iterate over that. So I can say dogs image array, and let's see, I have there's strings. I can do like a dot each. I can do a map, not dot each. That's Ruby, but I can use a for each. Let's do for each right now. For each, and I'm going to continue to use arrow functions, just because I prefer to use them. And I would suggest that you guys get comfortable moving into them. But if you can also just use regular ES5 functions as well. So for each of these things, so if this is a dog's image array, each of these things, one particular thing, I can just call it a dog image, right? And I can use my fat arrow here. And what do I want to do for each of these things? Well, I'm thinking I want to make an image for each one. I'm not quite sure how to do that yet. But I'm just thinking, what if I instead create another function called add dog image? And they're very similarly named, but this is, again, this kind of pattern that you'll see happen over and over now and continue as we move into React in Mod 4. Is that you have this one function, add dog images, that deals with all the dog images, and its only real function is to iterate over that array of images and then pass or invoke another function for each of those items in that array. Right? And what I mean by that is here, if I just say, if I invoke this add dog image function and I pass in this particular dog image, I'll just put my debugger here, right? We're kind of like breaking this code down little by little and getting to its most simplest component for the one individual item at this point. So now, if I refresh the page, I should hit the debugger down at this point with add dog image, right? And I'm dealing with a dog image here. I'm going to use the same descriptor. And so that's kind of why I went and added the S here, like dogs image data, dogs image data, because they're dealing with not one dog image, but all the dogs image data. So now if I hit the debugger and I look where I'm at, and you'll also pick up on the fact that I'm constantly hopping in and out of my console, my browser, and confirming things. That is by far the best way to code in Mod 3 and moving into Mod 4. So I hit the debugger and I can see, well, what is this dog image thing I have here? Awesome. Now I'm just dealing with one string, right, at a time. So for every one of these strings in here, I'm invoking this function and passing that string through. If I have 4 things in my dog's image array, I'm invoking this add dog image function 4 separate times and passing in 4 different strings, right? And so for each of those things, I want to create an element. I want to add the source to that element, and then I want to append to that element. That is one method. This is kind of one of those forks in the road situations, right? Because as we start creating nodes or HTML elements, you'll hear them called either or. As we start creating nodes, we can either create them all individually and assign variables or attributes to them individually, or we could use the string literal option and kind of do it all in one go. And personally for me, I always kind of opt for the string literal, just because it's less lines of code to write. I don't have to worry about things floating out by themselves. And I can easily add styles, or if I want to add the source attribute, I can just write it in as near HTML. And what I mean by that is here I can say const img equals, I just use img as my variable name, and I can use backticks. And here I might forget, like, do image tags have opening and closings? And what I always like to do here is just hop in, create an image tag really quick. It automatically creates it, and just cut it from here. And then I can just paste it in, right? Not a copy and paste. It's pretty easy. And I know here, this is the source, is what I want to put in for this dog image string, right? And so I can use string interpolation to pass that in. So I have this thing. If I move my debugger down here now, I can kind of check this out. So what is image img right now that I defined? Ah, cool. Okay, it's a string. It's still a string, but it looks like an image tag, and it has all the information for an image tag. Right? It has my source in there and everything. So what happens? What do I want to do with these dog images? Well, if I look here, I have this div called dog image container, and it says images here. So I assume I want to append all those images here. Well, I could append them if I was going the one route. I could have created these image elements, and then appended those images to this div. But we can't really jump horses now that we're already in the water. So instead of appending, what I'm dealing with is setting its inner HTML. And when I say set inner HTML, it basically means I'm going to take this string.
Are you requiring this debugger somewhere, or how is yours activating?
It's already built into JavaScript. That's the best part about it. So unlike Ruby, where you need to require like a pry or a bybug, debugger's built in.
So you have to have DevTools open, you said? I'm just struggling to get my debugger to activate.
Yeah, you have to have your DevTools open in the console. Sorry, so I just saw your thing, Sam. It says, so the request is a certain dog's image, the response is the dog's image. The request that we're doing here, we're going out to this endpoint, and we're requesting whatever's there, right? We don't really know what's there. We get JSON as a response back, which is like this big, large string, and we parse it with this .json method, and we're happening to call the thing that's parsed, that is returned to this .then here, that's parsed. We're calling it dog's image data, and it's just a JavaScript object. Yeah. Let's do that. So for good example, or good prompt. So Alex said we can put this in the URL, right? And I can. If I just paste this endpoint in here, I can take a look at, this is what I'm requesting. I'm requesting this whole thing, right? And that looks like an object. And it has a key called message has an array, and it has a status as success. So when this comes back in the first .then as RESP, it comes in this form. It doesn't come in this form. It comes in a form that's more like this, like a big string, right? So it looks like a big string, and since a string's not an object, so I use this method .json that I call on this whole thing that knows how to turn it from a string into a JavaScript object. And that's what is in this second then. This dog's image data here is now this object that I can then pass in to this method or this function. Yeah, it's a promise. Yep. And some of this, honestly, for now, it could be confusing. Like, I think you all, if you can understand this for sure, like, you want to understand what's happening here. But the positive thing about this is it's all, again, really boilerplate. This is kind of something you can pattern match to start with to get by. And just know that this is the area that you're going to either console log or put your function to pass the data through. but most of this will stay the same. You can always call this resp. You can always just leave this as resp.json, and then you just tend to name this whatever data it is that you have. So if I'm reaching out and getting information about cats, I'll call it cats data. Or if I'm getting information about books, I'll call it books data. And this .catch will kind of always look in this context for now, at least, until you do other things with it. All right, so I was down here with this add dog image data. John, did you get the debugger working, by the way?
No.
Are you invoking the function?
Where are you? Oh, you're invoking it down below line 28.
Yeah, you gotta invoke the function. Otherwise, I'm just defining a function and never calling it, right? So I'm never gonna hit the debugger.
Yeah, definitely. Let me try that real quick. Okay, yeah, I got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, you can invoke it in the console as well, like Steven mentioned. Yep. Cool. So let's look at this debugger. And what I meant to say, though, is, so I had this string. Let's hop back in here. And the route I'm choosing, so I'm not creating the elements, I'm using the inner HTML route, is I'm essentially saying, take this thing here, this string, and don't append it, so like don't add it in here, but just literally copy and paste the internal guts of this div equal to that, right? And then using the inner HTML property, it will convert that from a string to an image tag. So I mean, now if I were to save this and refresh, like we'll have our image after I step through. Built. Right there, right? But we'll do that with JavaScript. So I can reach out to this thing. How do I get a hold? I need to grab this node somehow. How would you guys suggest I get a hold of this? I'll ask Sam. Sam, how do you think I should? What method should I use to get this div? Yeah, get element by ID. Right, and so I'll go up top and I'll list this out. This is an image container, right? So I'll just name it image container. And I can use the get element by ID. I could use other things, right? I could get it from its tag name or whatnot, but you always want to use the most specific method, query method here. And now I can just pass in the ID, which I believe was dog image container. And I could just go back to the debugger and make sure my image container, I had this set up wrong. That looks funky. I can make sure my image container variable is the thing I think it is, right? So if I go back through and I refresh, I hit my debugger, I can call any variables here if I want. I do say document.get element by ID is not a function. Let's see. Because I capitalized the D here. That's another great thing about the console, the dev tools here as well. Like I couldn't remember is get element by ID, does it have a capital I and capital D or not? And if I just type it in here, I get prompted with the available methods I can call, right? And I see, oh no, it's lowercase. So it's kind of a great way to code side by side because this is huge repository of knowledge you have available to you. Yeah, I mean this is why I love Mod 3 so much, is that you get such great feedback from the console. Like you have the most insight to your programs and your code than you ever had in Mod 1 and Mod 2. So if I refresh, now that I'm here, I can see, okay, is this thing I called image container here actually the thing I think it is? And even though I'm in this debugger, because how JavaScript scopes locally and then moves outwards, I do have available access to this image container. So I call image container. Oh, interesting, it says null. So it can't find anything. So maybe I made a mistake. Get element by ID equals dog image container. What's happening here? This is probably an issue you guys are going to find often, that you just get stumped and you can't understand what's going on. Let's see if we have a solution in the chat box. Yeah, nice job, Steven. So Steven's saying it can't, even though like I didn't spell anything wrong. I see that my DOM has this ID, but by the time I load my script, if I look where my script file is, it's up here, right? And so if it's trying to run that JavaScript code at this point before any of this exists, and it then tries to set a variable equal to something with dog image container ID, that doesn't exist yet, so it's going to be null. And then it's going to move forward the rest of the code, and that variable will remain null. So Steven said I can move this down to the bottom. That is one solution, but I also, like Raza, like to use the defer tag here. So I'll just put in defer, refresh the page, and again, the constant checking, I'm finding that now and not 4 methods down where I don't know where the issue lies. Yep. And so now if I look here at image container, I have found that I am grabbing the right thing, right? And I can highlight this thing that was what it is. So cool, I have the right thing now. All right, well, let's move forward. So what do I want to do with that image container? I have this variable now. Well, I want to I can just concatenate, essentially, this image tag. So I can add to it img. And what that means is, every time this runs, if this dog's image array has 4 things, I'm going to iterate over that, and for each of those, I'm going to invoke the function and pass in that element, which happens to be that particular dog image URL. And I'm going to invoke this function, and what that will do is it will say, okay, image container is equal to everything it is equal to now, plus this latest image tag. So if there's nothing there, it's equal to nothing plus that image tag, and then I move the next element. And so the second element, this is invoked again, and it says, okay, image container is equal to that one image tag plus this other img, and so on and so forth, and we'll just build out my images in that container. And I do have a one piece missing here. It's not just on the image container. I had to call the inner HTML method, right? Because I'm not setting image container equal to image. I'm setting the inner HTML of image container plus equal to that. So that was a lot, I know. Let's see if it works in function. And look at, we have our 4 images. I'll pause here and see if you guys have any questions at this point.
Can you show the image container variable one more time?
Yeah. Up here?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, can you be specific on where I lost you, Alex?
I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to look at the document.getByElementID method you were using.
Oh, yeah, you're good, John. I think Alex had something in the chat box.
Okay.
Yeah, I was, okay, so the add dog image function, can you just, okay, so can you just explain that last line one more time again, why we need 2 increments?
Yeah, I'm going to go through, I'm going to put a debugger here, and I'm going to grab this dog's image array value, show you what that looks like first. So let's refresh here, and I'll do dog's image array, and it's this, right? And then I'm just going to put this in comments here. So up the dog's image array, this thing is equal to this, right? And this is, what is this? This is an array of 4 things.
Yeah, 4 pictures.
So are we good with this piece right here?
Yeah.
That's what that is. So every one of these here, every time when we iterate and do the for each, we are invoking this function for this. We're going to invoke this for this whole thing. We invoke it for this whole thing. We invoke it for this whole thing and this whole thing. So let's start little by little and build what happens. So right now, this is our, this div is the thing that is our image container, right?
Yeah.
This here is this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And right now it has nothing inside. It's just empty. There's nothing between it. It has no children. So this first thing here dog image, we'll start with this one. So the first one we pass as we iterate over this entire array, we invoke the function add dog image and we pass in the first element, which is this string. So this thing is getting invoked and dog image equals this, right? Or not dog image, image equals this.
Okay.
Right? That's what the value of image is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. That's what the value of dog image is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So dog, this thing here equals this string, which is what we're setting the source to. Cool?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what this means is, let's just do this and say, what image tag, it looks like this, it's this image tag here. That's what img is. And we're saying this line here, image container, which is this div, the inner HTML, which is its children essentially. If we just say it equals image, that means that it would equal this here.
Mm-hmm.
It would be like that, right?
Yeah. But by incrementing it, you add all 4 images.
Yeah, and so what would happen is if we did it this way, that meant, okay, that worked for the first one, but now we get down to the second one. And now the second one is this thing gets passed in, that's what dog image is, that's what this source is, and then we say, okay, image container inner HTML equals this image. And so we're effectively just pasting over top of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're only going to have at max one image each time. Does that make sense? Because we're just reassigning the value and saying, okay, it equals this image tag with this source. And then the second time we run it, we say, now it equals this image tag with this source. But what we're doing with the plus equals, it's the same. We're just saying it equals, it's the same thing as writing image container that inner HTML equals image container that image container that inner HTML plus image.
Yeah.
So we're saying it equals what it currently is plus this image here. So the second one, now it would look like this. And then we go to the third one, and now we have a new image with a new source, and we say, okay, it equals what it currently is, so these two things, plus this image here.
Mm-hmm.
And it adds this one, right?
Cool. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay.
Very cool.
Man,
Yeah.
my brain's getting confused with image container and inner HTML.
No, that was good. That was very clear. Nice explanation. Thank you. Great.
All right. So now, if we go back to where we were here, and this is a shortcut, you can write this here, just like saying like count equals count plus 1, right? We can just use the plus equals 1 to increment. You guys, do you remember doing stuff like this with basic Ruby? I will say silence means yes. So we can do that. We can use that same syntactic shortcut here and just put the plus equals image. So that's the inner HTML method of this. The opposite side of it would be building each component, each node itself, using the create element command, assigning a source attribute of dog image to each image, and then appending each image to the image container. So we have like 3 lines of code for each one, which isn't that much more difficult, but again, I prefer to do the string interpolation method. Furthermore, because it makes it more visual for me coding. I can see what I have here. And I'll show you again as we do this. We have a comment. Silence is golden, yes. So I look at it now, and if I refresh, I have my dogs. Really cool. And if I look at the HTML in my DOM, I can look at the container, and I see I have those 4 image tags, right? With their specific sources that we had passed in. Cool. Well, I don't really these are all different sizes. I kind of want to make it pretty, so I'll just show you that we can do stuff like, this is one reason I like using the string interpolation method, is that instead of having to say like image.style.height equals this, image.style.width equals this, I can just add my attributes in here like I would normal HTML. So I can say height equals, let's just say 275, and then width equals 300. Right? I can add them right in like that, and now I got them all in the same line. Cool. And then I might want to say like style equals how do I do this here? Yeah, okay. Padding 30 px. I only want padding is 30, and I can say 0. So this is like CSS stuff. Go a little less. Let's go 25. This was in the intro to CSS stuff I covered, right? Where like what is padding? What does this mean here? Well, padding, and I can look at the box model in my DevTools. Padding is the stuff. If this is, you have your content, your padding, your border, and so let's inspect an element, and you'll see it automatically updates. Content is everything that is the image tag, right? Or if it's text, anything that's the content. The padding is everything outside of that, but inside of the border. Then the border is this piece here that you can't really see, and then the margins, everything outside of the border. But again, I'd point you to the Intro to CSS lecture for some of this stuff here. And what I did is you can assign, when you assign padding, if you just use the padding attribute or the padding tag, you can assign it, if I pass one number, like if I just said 25, like I'll just say 25 pixel. Now I refresh, and if I look at one of these, it sets it 25 all the way around. I could say 25, I could say 25, 1, or 25, 50, 100, 150, right? Four values, 4 directions, and it's like a clock basically. So if I inspect, I might have to do pixel. So now if I inspect, it starts at the top, 25, and goes clockwise, 50, 100, 150. If I only pass 2 values, so let's say 25 and 50, it assumes that this first one is top and bottom, and the second one is left and right. So now if I look, 25, 25 for top and bottom, 50, 50 left and right. Again, this is kind of intro to CSS stuff, so you might have questions about it. Yeah, I could do display block for one, like separate lines, and one of the block styling in there. But I liked it how it was, and I'm just going to say 25 pixel and 0 pixel. So 0 and 25, right? I like the spacing of there's always going to be 4 across, and they look, I mean, this one was a little shorter on this side, but they look pretty evenly spaced for me for what we're doing here. And no matter what pictures I get in, they'll all be the same size. I think that looks good for me. Picture's a little distorted for some of them, but it's fine. And you might think like, okay, this is kind of getting busy, right? This whole tag, there's a lot going on. This is, again, CSS lecture. I'd point you there. But I could pull this out and make it its own external file and just assign it to an image. Or since I'm doing something pretty simple here, I can do an internal style sheet using the style tag. This has nothing to do with the JavaScript lecture for today. This is CSS lecture. But I'm just kind of walking you guys through. And again, if you're interested, go watch that. But I could do a style tag here and assign properties. I'm only going to have these dog images. I won't have others, so I'll just use the image tag selector, and I can move all this stuff, height, width, and padding, over to my HTML. So height, 275 pixel, width, 300, padding 0 and 25. And now it will inherit these properties I have defined in my styles tag. So I can take this all away.
Real quick, how does your add dog image function have access to the image container variable? Mine was kept saying that there was like no null property of inner.html, and it didn't work until I moved image container variable inside that function.
Do you have your defer tag on your script? on the HTML?
Say that again.
If you go to your HTML file, do you have your defer tag here?
Probably not.
That's I imagine what was causing the issue.
Okay, yeah.
So that was you know what? That's a great question. And do you want to know what was actually happening behind the scenes? This is kind of a great overview of promises. So you're saying, okay, it was not working here, but it was working here. Why is that? Because if all this runs instantaneous, shouldn't it not have found it in this function as well? But what was happening is, when you had this defined in your add dog image tag, your add dog image tag was dependent on add dog images tag, which was dependent on your fetch, and your fetch happens asynchronously, right? This wasn't getting called right away. There was probably a half-second delay happening. So what was going on is it loads all this in, it executes your JavaScript, but you have this open promise happening from this fetch that takes time to get filled. And so it moves on loading the rest of the file, and because computers run so fast, it was able to load the rest of your DOM, and then your promise was fulfilled. So then you invoke this function, and when you invoke this function and invoke this function, when you invoke this function and invoke this function, which when this is when you define that variable, it was able to find it on the DOM.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah, it's kind of cool seeing that, and that's where like some of the murkiness can happen in JavaScript. You're like, wait, what the hell? It doesn't make sense. But then you're like, oh shit, I had an asynchronous call, and that's the thing with asynchronous promises. Yeah, definitely pretty wild. It's almost like the set timeout, right? That's an asynchronous call happening, and it's kind of like you had a timeout set here, and so with that timeout, by the time it took for that promise to get fulfilled, your computer was able to run and load the rest of the DOM. But really neat. So are you all set now, John?
Yeah, that cleared it up. It's working flawlessly now.
Cool. All right. So where were we? Oh, yeah, we were looking here, and if I refresh, everything looks the same, right? And so because I moved, and I don't have all that style kind of murking things up. Yeah, that's the third way. You could use the DOM content loaded and put all of this inside of that event listener. I don't prefer that way. For me, it's too much clutter, and it's just much easier to have just this defer tag here. So that's the way I like to go. But again, different paths. Sweet. So I think we have deliverable 1 set, right? We have all of this here. Let's move on to challenge 2. And it says it gives us another URL to reach out to. So we have another fetch request, right? And it says it says on page load, fetch all the dog breeds. Okay, let's just worry about that now. That's all we care about. Let's just get to the console.log. That's always where I start, and that's where I would recommend you guys starting. I do want to kind of put some separation in here. So I have invoked functions, and just for my own housekeeping, I'm going to say fetch dog image functions, right? That's what all of these are here. And I'm going to paste this, and I'm now going to say fetch dog, and we're talking about dog names, so these are going to be fetch dog name functions. And honestly, there's a lot here. I can just use this as a template, right? It's kind of going to be the same thing, because I'm going to fetch the images, I'm going to have an array of, or fetch the names, I'm going to have an array of dog names, and I'm going to go over each dog name and append it to the DOM. So it's just this three-prong approach here. So let's start with my first one, which is function fetch dog names. And I can just do my fetch request. Fetch, what was the endpoint? This bothers me that they use double quotes here and single quotes here, so I'm just going to cut out that, because I'm super anal about stuff, and use double quotes. Put that in the wrong spot. Okay, and then I do my .then, right? It's like second nature, my response.json. Keep it all closed together. My second .then. We call this last one dogs image data. I'll call this dogs name data. Keep with the convention. And then I don't have anything called, I'll just console log. That's where I said I was going to go first. So console log dogs name data. And then I'm going to throw my catch in as well. .catch err for error, console.log err. Cool. Now, if I want this to run on page load, I'm going to need to invoke this too, right? So I'll invoke this function just below this, right? Nice and orderly. Cool. So I should now have the dog's name data console logged when I load my page. I look in the console, sweet, I have this object. And this object has a message key which points to a value that is an object of all these different dogs. Very cool. Everyone here at this point? Or anything you want to go over? Okay. And you see how like similar these are, right? It feels good that this is kind of becoming a pattern. I can see we're basically doing the same steps over a second time. So I don't even really have to think much of like what's the next point. Let's not console log these. Let's create a function. We had this add dog names or add dog images. Let's create an add dog names function. And I'm just going to put a debugger here, right? As usual. And then we can invoke this instead of console logging, and we can pass in. We're passing these in here, so let's create a parameter called with that name. And yeah, let's see where we're at. Haven't really made much of a difference here, but now I have this add dog name, add dog names. Let me see, hang on. This is add dog names, this is add dog images, dogs image data, dogs name data. It's called dogs name data. Right? And I had that object. Are you guys okay with this so far?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so we have this thing, dogs name data, and it has this, if I want to get the actual value, right, it's dogs name data dot message, and that's where the object of this lives. And this is a little different because the last one, when we called the dot message, the value of that key wasn't an object, it was an array. This is an object, right? Which, of this object, what are the values I care about in this object? Yeah, I care about the keys, right? The keys are the names. The names and the dogs are the things I care about because it wants us to add the breeds to the page, fetch all the dog breeds. And if I look, the dog breeds are these keys here. Right? They have these sub-breeds happening, but we don't care about those right now. All we care about are these keys. And I personally like working with arrays better than working with objects. Right? And you can choose to work with it as an object and do like a for in or for of, I forget which one it is. But I like working with arrays to start with. So at this point, I would Google how to convert keys of object to array JavaScript. Oh, look, I have this object.keys, and you pass in. So this is saying var object equals an object. And you can call the .keys method on the object class. So object and call .keys and pass in that variable, and it will create an array for you. Let's see that out in real time. So they're doing it here. Yeah, that looks just like what they're doing. So let's just give it a try. Even though we might not know, let's give it a try in the browser, right? So object.keys, and then I pass in the object. So I should be able to do it here. Object.keys, right? And then pass in the object, which is dog name data.message. Does it return an array? Oh, hell, look at that. I have an array of all the names. Pretty cool, huh? And we just did it in our console, so we don't have to like wonder if it's going to work. Yeah, it's definitely a little magic there. And arrays are nice to work with. So this works. I like it. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to set this equal to something. Maybe I'll call it const dog name array. Ah, look at that. It's starting to look familiar. Instead of just dog.data this dot message, it equals this here. It is science for sure. Cool. So now I have this dog's name array. That feels, I mean, so I've already done the steps, right? I just have to do this kind of the same thing. I'm just going to call for each on it. Dog name array dot for each. Each of these things is a dog name. And then I don't have a method called add dog name, but I'll just make one right after this. And I'm gonna put a debugger in. All right, cool. So I should hit this now, right? Let's refresh. Hit the debugger, and I should have dog name available. And look at that. That feels pretty good. I'm just dealing with a string. I kind of blocked out the rest of the noise, right? And we don't even know what we want to do with this name, but I know I have it in a format that I am comfortable working forward with. So it says add the breeds to the page in the UL as an LI. Okay, so I just want to create an LI with it. So that's going to look very similar to this. So I can just kind of keep this here, like code along, so like const li equals, and if I don't remember what an li tag will look like, I can just do my li thing. It's very simple. Okay, probably wasn't necessary there. Li, and then its text will just be the dog name. So I can use string interpolation here. Dog name. Sweet. And then what? I probably want to then append each one or go through and concat each one to the inner HTML of whatever is supposed to hold it, right? And if I look through here, I have my image container, but I had this UL of dog breeds, and that's probably what the LIs are going to be. So let's grab that thing. I called that image container. I'll call this name container. And now I can just use this again for reference and say name container dot inner HTML plus equals li. Cool. Let's see how it works. Boom. Look at that. I have them all created, right? And if I look here and I look at the DOM and look at the UL, I have all these LIs created. How are you guys feeling? Yeah. Any questions or any areas you want to clear up? Again, this probably feels like we just did it because we kind of just did it. Like we have this nice template we created here, and that system worked before, so why recreate the wheel? And you notice we kind of get more specific with our functions. We start here with this just getting the data. Now we have this whole mass of data that this whole function here just breaks it down into one piece, and then with this one piece deals with that one specific thing at a time. Okay, cool. So let's move on. If there's nothing to talk through, if no one has any more questions on this aspect of it, let's move on to the next challenge. And it says, once all the dog breeds are rendered, add JavaScript so that the font color of a particular li changes on a click. This can be a color of your choosing. Ooh, okay. So let's think. A click. What does that sound? If we're clicking, we're doing, what's that? It's an event. Yeah, it's an event listener, right? It's an event, and so we have to listen for that event. Now, again, you've come to another fork in the road, wise wizard, and you must decide which one to venture down. There's the road I like to travel often, but there's different times for different methods, or you might just become privy to one or the other. What we could do here is every time we create an LI, so path number 1 is every time you create an LI, right? So for all of these, you also create an event listener on that LI. So you have one event listener here, you have one here, you have one here, you have one here. So if this list is like 95 things full, we have 95 event listeners we've created, which is fine. That's one way to do it. That's the left path. On the right side of the path is you create one event listener on its parent container, and then you put a conditional in here that you only do something when that event listener fires. You only do something if the thing that was clicked was an LI. So personally, I like, and that's called, you're basically relying on what's called bubbling, right? And I'd encourage you to Google bubbling JavaScript after this if you're a little, if you're interested in that aspect of it. But I like to take the right side path. I like to create one event listener on the whole thing instead of conditional. And so what I mean by that is let's create one event listener on a DOM node that already exists on page load. So we know the UL here already exists on page load because we're grabbing it when we start. So let's put an event listener on that. So I'm going to make a little section for my event listeners. Nice and clean, right? And that one thing I called it name container. So name container dot add event listener. And it takes 2 arguments. It's going to be a click event. And I'm going to call this thing, what is this? Change color. Name color. Change name color. I just call it that. That sounds fine. And let's create our little section here. Cool. And we can then define it. And I'm just going to start with a debugger, like always, right? So I have this event listener now, and that's on this entire UL. So if I refresh, if I click like the UL, let's see if I can get the UL, which is up here. This right here is the UL. It should fire off, right? If I click right here, maybe not. Let's click here. Okay. Click there. I should be able to. Let's see if I can click the UL. It's not. That might have been it. So if I look at my event, you always, with an event listener, have an event available to you, right? It tells you everything about that event that was fired. Like it was a click event. All this information is here. It tells you where my X position of my mouse was, where my Y position of my mouse was. So if you ever wonder, like with clicking in games, a lot of times we'll use the event listener here, right? I could call event.x, event.x, and my X, when I clicked, was at the horizontal position of 186, and it was at the vertical position of 411. But what I care about is event.target. What was the target of my click? And it was an LI. So actually I did click an LI, right? But if I would have clicked, like, let's say the UL, it probably doesn't have much meat for me to click, so it's hard to get to. It would have said UL, right? But I clicked an LI here. And so I could say, okay, the event.target, what is the tag name of that, of the LI, right? Because I can call .tag name on a node, and it tells me LI in capitalization. And that kind of seems like it can be my conditional, right? Because I only care about, is the thing we clicked in LI? And I could always say, like, does that equal LI? And that's a true conditional. So that is going to be my conditional that I use to only do something if this conditional is met. And what do I want to do? I'll just say, I'll console log. You clicked a dog, right? So now I refresh, and if I click a dog, it tells me I clicked a dog. If I click outside of it, it doesn't fire. I'm clicking the dog still, but if I click here, it doesn't fire. So what do we want to do here? Well, let's put a debugger. That's always like the #1 go-to option when you're wondering, when you ask yourself, what do I want to do next? Always put a debugger in there. So I click here. I had this event. I know this conditional is met because I hit the debugger, right? So what do I want to do? I want to change the color. Okay, well I could just say event.target, right? That's the LI here. I already have that node available to me. I can then call style.color and just set it equal to red. There we go, right? What color do you guys want to change these to? Green. All right, we're going green. I wonder if is army green one? Army green. No, probably not. We'll just use green. There we go, right? And I can just copy that in. That's the thing I want to happen. That's what I want to happen if they click it. I have the event here, right? I don't need to reach out for the node and search through. Them clicking it tells me what they clicked. Well, we have what? Oh, you want gradient animation? We could do a random color. That would be fun. But now let's try this out. I click, look at that. Click, 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 click. That was a pretty easy one, right? It seemed kind of daunting at first, but then you realize, oh, I just put an event listed on the whole thing, put one conditional, and then I use the event.target here to dictate what I want to happen. Pretty cool. And if we change this, like we could change this to mouse over, right? And now, anytime my mouse goes over them, look, it just did. So check this out. So anytime my mouse goes over them, they'll change it. That's a different event. Pretty sweet, huh? I'll change it back to a click. So we have it as green, but let's say we did want to do. Yeah, definitely. That's how like painting simulators you could easily make a paint simulator like that, like a Microsoft Paint, and you have these things on the side that they click, and them clicking at, like, you have little boxes over here that are like red, blue, green. If they click here, that changes a global variable to be green, and now whenever they start painting and click, that's what they paint, right? Is that color of that global variable. But yeah, you could definitely easily make a painting simulator with that.
Earlier, I kind of had two questions. Let me just say them both before I forget them.
Sure.
Well, one is like when you had, was it event.target X's and Y's, and then there was, what was that again? Was that like the X and Y axis of like pixels on the actual screen? Like, was that a physical location on the screen? Is that what?
Yep. Yeah, let's go back to that. So we have the debugger here, right? And if I click, I'll hit the debugger. And now I have available, because it was an event was fired, right? I invoked this change color name as part of an event listener. So because of that, I have this variable called event available to me, this mouse event. And it tells me a ton of information. It tells me bubbles, so if it allows bubbling, I believe that's what it is. I've never used that. It has client X and client Y. And it looks like it has client X, client Y. These are the same values as X and Y. I'm not sure what the difference is, honestly. One might be, yeah, I'm not sure what client X, client Y, how that differs from X and Y, but these are essentially the positions of the mouse when it was clicked.
Wow, that's great.
Where the mouse was. I think this page X, page Y tells you how far up the mouse, like where the page was at when it was clicked. So let's see, if I click it, let's refresh. If I click here at the very top, I wonder if that page X or page Y will be 0. 114. I guess I'm not sure what page X, page Y is. But yeah, the X and Y is where your mouse was when you clicked it.
Cool.
Yep. So if I click way over here, I should be like in the low 50s or something.
And you could, hypothetically, you could design different events.
11.
You could put event listeners in different spaces and just regions on the screen.
Oh, for sure, for sure. You could have like a mouse over, like if a little Easter egg, you could have one pixel up here that if it crosses over, an event fires it, like takes them to a whole new page, right? You can embed little stuff like that. A lot of games, simple games, are based on like looking where the mouse is. You can also have key presses, like what key was pressed. There's different event listeners, but there's like this event has so much information on it, right? You only usually use like event.target most often, but all of this is available.
Cool.
Was that that was one question. Do you have another?
And you got into that just by event.target. That's all that was.
Just event, actually.
Oh, just event. Okay.
Yeah. Target is a key of the event I can call. So I can call event.target, and that tells me what was the target of that event. And it was this
target.
node.
Target is one of those.
Oh, okay. I finally clicked the UL. So the cool thing here is, since I clicked the UL, if I hit play, nothing will get colored because that conditional wasn't met, right? Because the tag name is UL and not LI. Do those X and Y positions vary on the user screen size? Honestly, that could be a good blog post if you want to talk about it. I'm not quite sure, John, on that. I would imagine. I imagine that it would take into account the screen size, but I'm not. That's way kind of beyond where I'm at. That's more of like structural system, like Chrome browser / Mac OS situations happening.
Mm-hmm. And so that click event goes back to the event listener, which has got a click on it. And then my other question was, can you explain why you decided to put the event listener on name container one more time?
Oh, so the two options was I could have went down the left path where every time I created this, right? Mm-hmm. I created one of these. I would have had to put an event listener on each of these. So I can't do it through this mechanism here. I would have had to do like const li equals create element, document.create element li, and then li.add event listener, click, and then call that function, right? But because I went this way, I can't really put an event listener. I can do an on click, I think, like this, but you guys aren't there yet. So, and that would have meant if I put an event listener on every single li, if there's 20 LIs or 100 LIs, I have 100 event listeners. So that's one path, which you can go down. The path I went down was putting only one event listener on the entire, on its parent node. So the UL here in the console, this UL, you see if I highlight over it, it highlights all of those LIs, right? Because all those LIs are children of that UL. Mm-hmm. And so I have this UL with the event listener. So if I click anywhere on the UL or inside of the UL, my event will fire. And then I put a conditional saying, if that thing that was clicked was a LI element, so if event.target.tagname equals LI, then change the color of it to green.
But how are you accessing that through name container?
Name container is this document.get element by ID dog
breeds. I see it.
Which is this here.
Yes. Okay.
Yep.
Through the ID of name container. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So you said event.target would have saved me a ton of time. Mine's yeah, like you can get there the same way. Some ways are easier, some are less easy. This for me, like I prefer this method, honestly. I prefer string literals, and I prefer to rely on bubbling for stuff like this. Cool. We have one more thing. Let's see. Yeah, I do agree. I think it looks cleaner too. Honestly, that's kind of why I prefer it. And you can even, I mean, if you want to get like, there's some funkiness here, right? This is a question. This here, this is beyond the point. but you could be like, do something like this. So this is an OR operator, right? And it will only run things, if this is true, it will never run this line of code, right? Because one of these, an OR operator says, if this or this is true, return true. And so if this is true, it will never run this code. If this is false, it will run this code. So you could change it to say, well, event.target.tag name, let's say if it does not equal, if it equals, triple equals li, well, let me think. If it does not equal li, then it will, that's not what we want to do. Well, we could say if it does not equal ul, because that could be the only thing it could otherwise be. So you could do something like this, and this should work the same way. Oh, no. Nope, never mind. It won't let me do that. I would have to put a method here and then call it in the method, which is more work. So forget what I just said. We'll probably cover something like that later, though. All right, cool. So we're here at this point, so we can change the color to green. Let's go and what do you guys want to move on to this fourth one, or do you want to do like a random color? The random color is kind of beyond it. We're just using math.random. But let's move on to the fourth thing. So we got this here as green, and now it says, I'm going to change it to powder blue. I think that's a color. Yeah, there we go. That's pleasing. No offense on your green, John. Cool, so let's go to challenge 4. And it says, once we are able to load all of the dog breeds onto the page, add JavaScript so that the user can filter breeds that start with a particular letter using a dropdown. So if they select A, only the dog breeds with A would be visible. Powder green. I don't know if powder, I can try powder green really quick. No, it's got to be powder blue. So what we want to do is have this drop down working, right? So first thing we can do is, let's take a look at what is this thing if we inspect it. Okay, it's this select, and it has an ID, right? It's the select with all these options, and it has an ID breed dropdown. So let's just actually set that to a variable. I'll just call it filter. And what is this? When I select something, what do you guys think that is? It's an event. Perfect. It's an event, and we might not know what type of event that is because it's kind of like a click event, but it's kind of different, right? And so I would just Google event type select option. And one thing to be warned of is you'll see a lot of stuff for jQuery. And so you kind of have to, if you see jQuery, that's probably not what you want. So you have an on change. That's not jQuery, but that's built into the select. And I do add event listener here. Add event listener. And we see this here, and we say, oh, okay, I see this thing that says change, right? Add event listener change. Well, let's try that out. So I called this thing filter up top. I'll say filter dot add event listener, and I'm going to put change. And what do I want to do? I'm going to say filter dog names, and then I'm just going to separate this out, create some space. Filter dog names function, and create a function callback. Function filter dog names. And what do you think we're going to do first thing? What would you recommend? Yeah, console.log or debugger, and I'm saying debugger because that's where my allegiance lies. Just put a debugger in there, and let's see if this works the way we think. Because with the console log, with the debugger, we have so many more options, right? We can check stuff out, like check things out with what we have the event on. So if I click C, oh cool, the event fired. That seems pretty good. If I look, what type of event is it? It's a change event. What's the event.target? It's the select, and since it's the select, I can say a select tag here, right? These options have values associated with them, just like the collection selects we dealt with Ruby. And I can call .value on there, and I get what was selected, the string lowercase c. So that seems pretty handy, right? Okay, cool. I had the C thing. So I know that the event when they changed to C, I had the string C. So what could I do? What could I do here?
Would it be a conditional somehow?
Yeah, I can do a conditional, but it seems like I'm gonna have to check each dog name to see if it starts with that letter. And exactly, that seems like we want to iterate, right? I'm sensing some iteration happening here. And so what I can do is I can set a variable. Let's say const filtered dogs, and I can just iterate, right? So how do I get all of these things here? Well, let's just try it here. How do I get all of these LIs? Do you guys know how to reach out and grab them? What do all of these dog names, what do they live in? Well, so the fetch, Alex, you only use fetch when you want to grab data from another website or you want to send data to another website. But if the data lives on our page, we don't have to use a fetch. Fetch is strictly for API calls. Get element by ID. Let's be more simple about it, or let's answer a broader question. Where does all of this live? All of these LIs live in what? What type of element? Where do all of these live? In a UL, in this UL. And we already have this UL set to a variable, right? I think we call it name container, right? Don't we already have that get element by ID for dog breeds right here? We call it name container. So if I'm in here in my debugger, right, which is why I love debugger, I can just look, what is name container? Oh yeah, it's all of this. Well, if I have that node, I can just call it and ask what its children are. And check that out. There's all the children. Pretty cool. Now, here's one thing I want to make note of. Since in my conversations with you guys, I've always said an HTML collection is like an array. Like for all intents and purposes, think of it like an array. There's some subtle differences, but for now you can think of it like an array. Well, now is where one of those subtle differences come into play, because it's not actually an array. It's right here. It's called an HTML collection. There are some array methods I can call on it that are available for arrays. So like, oh, sorry, I lost that, children. I can call .length, and it tells me it's 94, has 94 things. But one thing I can't call is the iterator for each. So if I call for each, and I call each of these things a name, and I'll just say console.log name, I get an error. Name container.children.forEach is not a function. So for each is not a method I can call on an HTML collection. Yeah, debugger is, honestly, debugger, I said this in the beginning, and I say it like every single day, every time I talk to someone. If you use debugger in Mod 3, you will love Mod 3. People that hate Mod 3 don't use debugger. But Mod 3 is made immensely more easy and more understandable using the debugger and doing a lot of coding in here. That's why I get so excited about it. But yeah, you can see I can't actually call this for each, right? And doing some research, there's a few methods, a few different ways we can go. We can transform the HTML collection into an array, but we can also do like how to iterate. Oh, look at that. It came right up because I looked at it earlier, because I forgot that for each wasn't something you can call an HTML collection. Exactly. You can use like a for, I believe you can use a for of. Yeah, you can use a for of. Absolutely. So even though we can't use the for each method, we can use the for of, which kind of seems weird, right? It's like well, if I can do this, why don't you just make it so I can do that? But there's something happening in the hood that I haven't looked at yet that doesn't allow it. But yeah, we can use for of, and so in here I can set this equal to, first I'll do well, we won't have the filtered dogs. What I can do is we can use a for of to go over them, right? So we had said this is name container.children. So we'll just call this name const. I'll name it name collection. And it's set equal to name container.children. And now I can do a for of and iterate through and say for, and how for ofs work is, I go back to that Stack Overflow post. Yeah, that would be a great blog post, talking about why you can't use a for each in an HTML collection, but you can use a for of. So paste this in just for reference, and for the for loop we define our internal variable, and we're dealing with name collect, which is a collection, and we'll just call each of these things a name. So for let name of name collect, and now we're good in iterating. So I have name available for each, and for each of these I want to ask if name, which is an HTML node, right, an li node, so name dot inner text. Well, you know what? Let's not even do that. Let's throw it a debugger, because I think I'm getting ahead of myself, because I'm starting to stretch a little too far beyond comfort. So I refresh, I hit my debugger. I should hit my debugger in my for of as soon as I hit the drop down, right? I should hit this debugger, and I should have this name variable available to me. Hit the debugger. It even tells me what name is, right? Like name collect here. And now let's see what name is. Cool. Name's one of these things, right? And what do I care about? What do I want to check here? The text content. Yeah, if I call name.textContent, I get the actual string. And if I look, I have this, I'm missing, I have event.target, event.target.value, which I probably should set to a variable so it makes more sense, but I essentially want to say, does name text content 0, right? If I want to get the first character, so that A, does that equal event.target.value? And that's my conditional, right? So let's go, and we've proven that in their debugger. Let's go and let's put this to a little more friendly term. So I'll just call this const filter choice equals that, and then I want to check if, and even here I could probably say const li li start. That's not very good. I'll just say li char and set this equal to name dot text content 0. Right? And so now I just want to ask if li char equals filter choice, then do what? Well, that's the thing. It's not that so much we want to do something. It's that I would say it's not so much if that equals filter choice. It's if it doesn't equal filter choice, we probably want to hide it, right? So we can just make this does not equal. So if li char, so if the first character of the li does not equal the search term, then we can hide this thing, right? Hide it. Let's put a debugger in, because we might not be sure how to hide something. So if I refresh, and if I change this to B, well, this first one does not equal it, right? So we're in this debugger right here. So we know the li char, if I look at what is li char, is A, does not equal filter choice, right? A does not equal B. So what do we want to do? Well, we have name, right? Name is again, this whole li. So there's something you can just call, there's a style here where you can set, if you don't want to delete it from the DOM, like we could do name.remove, and if we look, it's gone. But if we look at the DOM, we've actually removed that completely off the DOM. And I think for this for this operation, if we remove it completely off the DOM and delete it from the DOM, then it's going to be hard when we do another filter to bring that back. We're going to have to do another fetch because we no longer have it on our page, right? Yeah, the remove option's bad. And actually, Stephen, I did that initially at first, and what I had to do to circumvent that was set a global variable equal to the initial fetch call, and then I always had that to revert back to, but it just seemed like too many steps. So there's something we can do that we can hide it. Yeah, we can set its display to hidden. So we don't actually remove it from the DOM. So for instance, let's refresh and let's try that again. I go to B, and we have this pincher here. And instead of event.target.remove, we'll say event.target, or sorry, it's name.style.display, and set that equal to none. And watch, we'll see here it will go away. So it's off the DOM. It's off the web page, right? But it still exists in the DOM because we didn't delete the node. It's still here. We just set its display to equal none. So it's hidden. And if I step through this, you'll see, I would have to step through each of them. Whatever. I'll show you right now at this point, though. So that's, I think, what we want to do as we iterate through. We want to go through each one, and if those don't match, then we want to set the display of that li, the style.display, equal to none. So let's give this a run, and let's look at the li's while we do so. So we'll do B first, and look at that. All of these here, they're no longer on the page, and these C's down here, and all of them now have a style attribute with display set to none. So you only see these ones with B. I can change one back manually, and I can change it to block and put it back, right? And actually you'll notice this goes away when you do that. That's because the default is, I think it's li element or something. Li, I think it's list item. There we go. Yeah, its default is list item, which shows it and also puts the little notation here. That's kind of some HTML stuff. Yeah, thanks, David. And then I can change it back to none, and it looks like to the user that it's deleted, but it's still actually on the DOM. It's just being hidden, right? I think that's the way we want to go. And we just show them, like, oh, look, here it is. So that's cool. But now you'll see, like, if I change it to C now, I have nothing, right? Because I never changed all these back to none. So now everything's none at this point. So I don't have anything. So how to get around that? Well, what we can do is every time we run this, we can search through, we can reset all of the values back to text field. So what I mean by that, let's put some space here. So we have this for here. And this seems like a good time. I want to probably pull this out. I'm just going to say function. I'm going to say hide dog name. And I'm just going to paste this in here, right? And there's a few things I need. I don't have name anymore. So I want to have that as a variable. And what else don't I have? No, sorry, I just don't have name collect or filter choice. So let's pass those through. So I said name collect first, so I'm going to pass that through first. Sorry. I don't want to pull this whole thing out. I only want to pull out this here. We'll do it all in one. We'll worry about that later. I was trying to make that a little easier at first. We have a comment. So what do we want to do first thing off? Well, I want to reset every time I run this filter dog's name. The first thing I want to do is iterate through every single one of them and reset the names. So let's just actually create a reset. I'll just change this to reset show all dog, or yeah, show all names. And we'll do another for loop. And we'll pass in, I think we're going to pass in the name collect. Well, that's name container, not children. That's fine. We'll pass that in. Name collect. And we'll just say for name of name, and this won't have if statement. And we don't care about this. We don't care about that. And moving through this fast, but we'll back up in a second. And there's no for thing, right? Oh yeah, there is. Okay, so for name of name collect. And we're just going to set all of these to text to list item. That's all it does. It iterates through every single LI, and it resets the value of the display to list item, so it shows them all. That's what show all name does. So here, every time we run this filter, we can just invoke this function first, right? Show all names. And we want to pass it name collect. So let's see how that works. Let's look at what happens here. So if I filter, okay, these are none. And all these down here should be list item. You'll notice that it just changed these, right? Because the first thing that happens is it runs this, it iterates through every single list item and sets every display to list item, which shows them. And then it goes through and it sets the ones that is not that thing to none. And then if I switch again, it basically brings them back all to the page and filters again. So if I look and I select B, you'll see these A's here have all changed to none, and B is now list item. And then if I click again, none here, list item here. Are C's not working anymore? Oh no, it's working. Where are the list items here? There we go. Sorry, I was down below too much. So yeah, now this sort works. That was kind of a lot. Do you guys have questions right now? Yeah, you're welcome, Steven. I will say here, what we can do, what I would like to do here is we could have an all feature, right? So what if we go through the index and copy this and put another option here, and then put the value as all and change what the user sees to all. So now there's this all button here, right? So you should be able to select all to bring them all back. And what do we want to do? We want to show all of them. Well, we already built a method for that, which is pretty cool. So what we can do here is, what would be the best way? I don't want to call it twice. We have filter dog names, and we have show all names here, and we can just actually embed this inside. We can put it conditional. If filter choice, so if it does not equal all, then we know they're actually trying to filter it, right? And if it doesn't equal all, then we can do this stuff. And if it does equal all, we don't run any of this and we're done, right? And we've already, the first step here is we're showing all the names. So we just show all the names and we don't filter anything. I think we're actually done. So now I should be able to go to B. I got my B's, D, C, all of them back. And what we can do as well is we can pull this out as well and say filter, we have filter dog names, and we'll say hide dog names. And just do this here. So this ends here, cut this out, and now we have name collect and filter choice, and we want to pass those in. So name collect, filter choice, and then we can just invoke it in here. And now that's looking a lot cleaner, right? And that's why I like to break these down, because now you can kind of easily read through of what's happening here. We have these three functions. This filter dog name is on the event listener. If it fires off, it just sets some consonants, and then it shows all of the names. And if the filter choice is not equal to, if the filter choice is all, this conditional never runs, and so it's done, right? It just shows all the names. If this does not equal all, and it actually wants, the user's trying to filter something, this conditional is met, and it runs this hide dog's name function, which then iterates through each one of them, and depending whether or not this conditional is met, it sets it to none, or it sets it to none. So it should all work the same still. And then the cool thing about this too, since we're not deleting the nodes, if I went to go through here and click some of these and I hide them, well, that style still remains, right? Those are still colored, which is pretty cool. And I think that is everything. I think we completed all the challenges. We kind of went a little bit above because we had the all feature there. So if we look, we're under 100 lines of code. We have this nice and separated. We have our consonants up here. And I can even put a little comment tag up top and say variables. And then we have our fetch dog image functions, nice and separated here, these three things. Then we have our fetch dog name functions, these three ones here. And then we have our change dog name color function, just one. And then we have our filter dog name functions, these three, our event listeners, and then our invoked functions. So we're able to do all that. 83 lines of code, not bad, right? Nice and separated, pretty clean. And now it's at a point too where if I forget in months' time what does what, well, I can just narrow it down to at most 3 functions, right, by category. Any questions or comments or things you guys want to dive in deeper to or discuss? You guys good?
a little puzzled by the fetch dog image functions, but I think I'm sorry, no, the ones you just did, the filter dog names functions.
Okay.
But I think I'm just gonna have to kind of dive into those.
Yeah. Well, let's step through really quick, and that way it'll be on the tape as well at the end. What's happening little by little. So the first thing is we have an event listener, right? This on the filter, which is this filter is this node here, this select option. It's set to the thing with the ID of breed dropdown, right? So it's this select thing here with all these options. And the event listener is a change. So anytime that the value of this select changes, one of these, so if I click like here, the value of it is B, it changed to B. If I click here, it's C. So this fires anytime that value changes, right? It's a change event listener, and it invokes the filter dog names function, which is here. So what this does is we create a variable and we just set it equal to event.target.value, and the value is whatever's in here, right? This is the value of each of these options is A, B, C, or D, or all. So if I click C, the value is C. So filter choice equals C if I click C. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Now we had a second variable called name collect that we set equal to name container, which is defined here, which is the UL. So name container is this UL here, and everything inside of it. So if I call this name container is just this UL. So if I call .children on this UL, it gives me all of these LI nodes in an HTML collection, which is kind of like an array. Right? But it's not an exact array. It's not actually an array, so we can't call the for each method on it, but we can iterate using a for of loop. So that is what this variable name collect. It's set equal to the HTML collection, which is just essentially like an array of all the list elements. That's what name collect is. So the first thing that we do is we invoke this function called show all names, and we pass in that container of LIs. And what this does is it iterates over every single LI. So every single one of these, it iterates over it, and it sets its display for each item to equal list item. And list item basically means if display is list item, it means it's shown on the page, right? So if I change this to list item, it just appeared, mountain, right? It's shown on the page. If I change it back to none, it disappears. So what we're doing is basically iterating through every one of these LIs and changing their display to list item so they're all shown. Okay? So it's basically resetting everything to show everything back on the page. That's the first step. And then we have this conditional saying the only time we don't want all the items on the page being shown is if the selection that was picked is all, right? If the user comes in and picks this one that says all, that's the only time we want all of them to shown. But if that is not true, so if filter choice does not equal all, then we gotta hide some things. So we did the, and the computer runs so fast that the user can't see that all of them are set to display, and then we quickly iterate over and hide the ones that we don't want to see. So this is kind of like a clean refresh where it shows them all back on the page, and then we iterate over all of the names again. We call this hide dog names function, and we pass in the name collect and the filter choice just because it was all in one method before, so we had access, but since we broke it up, we have to pass these things through, so it still has access. And this hide dog name function iterates over all of the names, the LIs again, and it checks to see that if the first letter of each of the dog's name, if it does not equal what the filter choice is. So if the dog is a beagle and they picked C, so B does not equal C. And if that's a true statement, if B does not equal C, we know that we want to hide it. So we set that individual li, its style to none, which hides it.
Okay.
So in slow motion, and let's do this then. We'll put a debugger here.
So you put the name collect and the filter choice. Sorry to cut you off, but you put the name collect and the filter choice in there because the name collect is all of the lists, is all of the lees in the UL,
Yep.
and the filter choice is the specific value that comes from the selector.
The event, yeah. And when it was all in one function, then it was fine because I had access to those variables. But because I moved them into different functions, I got to pass those variables through, so I have access to other methods. And technically, like this name collect, all I'm doing is setting this equal to name container dot children, and I have access. Name containers defined outside of these, right? Outer scope. So I have access to the name container in each of these. So I really don't have to pass name collect in. I could just redefine it each time, but that means I would have to do like this each time. And it's just repetitive code. So I was like, I'll just define it once and pass it in as an argument.
Okay.
So if I put a debugger here, what you should see when I select something is that all the names show, right? Because it stops at the debugger. So if I refresh and I select B, all of the names are still here right now, right? Because we stopped it. We ran all show all names. And then if I hit play, it filters them. And if I select something again, all the names are back, right? Because we stopped it right after we refreshed everything, and we've yet to filter it out. We stopped right here. And then if I hit play, we continue on with the filtering. So, but again, because computers run so fast, the user doesn't really see all the names quickly flash, right? You don't really even see it.
Yeah.
And we can see what happens in the console. These are updating dynamically. Oh, yeah, I was wondering why these ones weren't changing. That's because these all start with like M and whatnot. And I only go to D, but if I go here, you can see these will update. And if I go to all, like these ones down here, if I go to all, will be all show again. Cool?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
All right, well, that's everything. I think I'm good for the night. I hope you guys are too. I will get this posted, and I'll get the code posted as well.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
Yeah,
thanks so
guys.
much. That was fantastic.
Yeah, it was fun. I will see you all tomorrow morning.
All right. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.